right, thank you. Please be seated. All right, we'll have the jurors return, please.
Thank you. I've got some, but thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bailiff. Please be seated. All right, we're back from the mid-morning recess. I believe we've got the issue sorted with the jurors' monitors. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, in attendance here for moving over to the other side of the courtroom so that those monitors aren't visible. Ms. Blake, if you'd like to continue with your direct, you may do so.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I had asked to publish, I believe states 295D. I'm going to change that to publish 295J. It's a previously admitted exhibit.
Okay, 295J, previously admitted, may be published.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Christensen, as part of your review of documents provided in this case, do you recall reviewing photos that were taken at the scene of Tammy's death?
I do.
And Judge, I am flying blind here if this is being shown or not.
It is.
Thank you. Dr. Christensen, on that photo, can you see something coming out of Tammy's mouth?
Yes.
Can you describe what we're seeing there?
Yes. This is foam, essentially. It's what a manifestation of pulmonary edema. You can see running down the left side of her face what looks like blood. Pulmonary edema fluid, as it comes up, is edema fluid is just fluid that leaks into the air spaces when it normally should be contained in blood vessels. And as it leaks into the air spaces, normally there is protein and other things within those air spaces to help keep them open. And as the fluid gets in there, it mixes with that protein and creates this bubbly, frothy fluid, which can then bubble up through the airway and out the nose or the mouth, or both.
Can there be several causes of pulmonary edema, or what ultimately causes that, or is it a result from?
Yes, pulmonary edema, again, I think I said previously, is a non-specific finding. that can result from any kind of insult to the lungs. We certainly see it in asphyxial cases. We see it in drowning cases. We see it in the setting of heart failure. We see it in the setting of drug intoxications. Those are probably the primary places where we see it, although really anything that causes respiratory failure can ultimately cause pulmonary edema to manifest in this way, pneumonias and other things.
Did the presence of the pulmonary edema also play into your findings in this matter?
Yes.
We've talked about Utah being a medical examiner system. So you yourself or another medical or forensic pathologist will respond out to a death scene in Utah, generally speaking?
In cases where the pathologist will respond to scenes where there is a homicide or suspected homicide, or in any case where we're requested to by law enforcement at the scene or our other investigators at the scene.
Do you know in Utah if someone responds out on unattended deaths?
Yes.
And is that generally someone from your office, whether an investigator or otherwise?
Yes, it's one of our investigators in most cases.
If you had seen the pulmonary edema, is this a case in which you would have had an autopsy performed?
Given the amount of information that was provided at the scene, what was relayed to me as what was shared at the scene, there's not an adequate explanation or sufficient medical history to explain her death at her age in a sudden and unexpected way without doing an autopsy examination.
I think we've gone over this a little bit, but when you did the internal part of the autopsy, did you notice, was there anything out of the ordinary in relation to Tammy's organs?
No.
Was there anything,
except for her lungs? Sorry.
and can you explain what was out of the ordinary with her lungs?
Her lungs were a little bit on the heavy side, heavier than would normally be expected, and had fluid in them. There were also changes related to her prior embalming.
Had you conducted other autopsies where pulmonary edema was present?
Yes,
Is pulmonary edema by itself actually a cause of death?
it's not.
Would it be the result of the cause of death?
Yes, it certainly could be. So if someone has pulmonary edema because they drown, drowning would be that. If they have pulmonary edema because they have heart failure, because they've had multiple heart attacks, then the underlying cause of their heart attacks would be their cause of death. But all of those kinds of things, anything, lots of different things can result in pulmonary edema.
And is pulmonary edema generally a manifestation or finding associated with asphyxiation being the cause of death?
It certainly can be, yes.
We've talked a little bit as well about your review of the external part of Tammy's body. Do you recall that?
Yes,
And you'd referenced the only external injuries you had seen were some bruises.
that's correct.
And Your Honor, I have what's been marked as States Exhibit 179. If I can have counsel handed a copy, and I have a courtesy copy for Your Honor, and then I would ask that the witness be handed a copy.
Very well.
Your Honor, this exhibit is some blank diagrams. My intent is to have it handed to the witness and have him add some markings to it.
Very well.
May I have the witness handed a pen?
The exhibit's not yet admitted, Ms. Blake. And I understand, because if it's going to be altered, just think of when that would take place if you're offering it.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Christensen, would you mark on that diagram where the bruising was located on Tammy Daybell's body?
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. And have you marked those based on your recollection of where you observed those injuries during the autopsy?
Yes.
And Your Honor, I would move for the admission of State's Exhibit 179.
All right, the exhibit now with the markings, I think it would be appropriate for defense counsel to see what the exhibit now looks like before I ask if there's any objection. All right, Mr. Bailiff, if you'd please submit that exhibit for reference to Mr. Pryor.
Your Honor, now that counsel's been shown a copy, I would move for the admission of State's Exhibit 179.
Okay, and I apologize, I lost track. Where is the exhibit at this point? Did you retrieve it?
I have it. Would Your Honor like to see it first?
No, that's fine. I'll ask at this point. Thank you, Ms. Blake. Is there any objection to Exhibit 179 being?
If it's
admitted?
being offered for demonstrative purposes, Judge, I don't have an objection.
Okay, Exhibit 179 will be admitted as a demonstrative exhibit. Ms. Blake, you may inquire.
And Your Honor, I would ask permission to publish.
You may publish.
Dr. Christensen, you can see on this exhibit, there's an R and an L that's been written in. Would you indicate what those represent?
Yes, those simply represent the right and left sides of the body. And at the bottom, I also indicated which was the front and which was the back, although that's fairly obvious.
And then it appears that there have been several dots or markings added. Could you explain what those represent?
Yes, they are not to scale, but they are representations of the locations where we identified bruises.
And on the front, there appear to be 6 dots. Is that correct?
Yes,
And then on the back of the body, 4 dots.
that's correct.
You've already indicated they're not to scale, but can you talk about and put into the record where on the body these bruises were located?
Yes. There's one on the left upper chest, 3 over the anterior and lateral right biceps, 1 on the anterior right forearm, 1 over the anterior portion of the left biceps, 2 over the right triceps area on the back of the upper arm and 2 on the back of the right forearm.
Did you discover any bruising on the lower extremities?
We did not.
Did you discover any bruising around the head or face area?
We did not.
Did you in fact take photos of the bruises that were observed during the autopsy?
Yes.
You talked before about the difficulty in determining the age of a bruise by simply looking at it. Is there something else that you did in this case to try to determine how recent the bruises occurred?
Yes. As I mentioned, just the visual appearance doesn't necessarily indicate to us how old a bruise is, but we can at least attempt to narrow that down somewhat by looking at the tissue in the bruise under the microscope. Blunt injuries, the body undergo a relatively orderly progression, although certainly not very time specific in a, to the minute or even to the hour sort of way. But initially, when there is an injury, you see just hemorrhage in the tissue. Then that will be followed some hours later, can be as early as 2, might be as many as 12 or even 24 hours. You will then see inflammation start to enter the area to clean up the hemorrhage. And depending on the severity of it, you may then also see what are called macrophages that come in and start to clean up some of the broken down blood cells. You may see the formation of scar tissue if it's significant, and that goes through a progression from early what are called fibroblastic cells in the area, which are just the cells that make scar tissue, which then eventually become replaced by the scar tissue itself. And that allows us, seeing what kind of changes are present in an injury can give us an indication whether this is recent, meaning minutes to hours old, whether it's hours to days old, or whether it's days to weeks or even longer old. But more specific than those sort of broad swaths of time, we can't narrow it down.
We talked about during the autopsy, photos were taken to document the injuries.
Yes.
Were photos also taken of examination done of the injuries?
Yes.
And Your Honor, I have what's been marked as States Exhibit 178 A to Q. Counsel was provided a copy today.
A series of photographs, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. It's a series of photographs taken during the autopsy.